I'm going to be talking about family betrayal, and I'm going to tell some truths about my early childhood life leading into my teenage years, and some pretty intense things that happened. Hopefully that will be helpful for other people. First, I'm going to start with a quote that's relevant. It's by Nietzsche, and it says, "Some are born to enjoy illusions, whereas others are cursed to know the truth." And that pretty much sums up how I felt my growing up years were like. I was doing some research on betrayal, and the two stories that really popped in my mind first were kind of the difference between Judas and Peter, because these are both two people who were incredibly close to Jesus, and both betrayed him, and yet the outcomes of how they're remembered and kind of how their lives wrapped up really show such an incredible difference in what I would like to call, I guess, coming back from or rebuilding. I don't know if it's rebuilding. It's the reestablishment of the relationship, I suppose, after such an event occurs. Because in some instances, if a new behavior is taken on by whoever it was who did the betrayal and true repentance happens, then the relationship can maybe reconnect, or at least in the case of Jesus, it would be the mission. Like Peter was still able to go on and continue the mission that he had started with Jesus, whereas Judas, that was severed forever, and that was never, he was never welcomed back. It was never any completeness of the circle, right? It was broken, irrecoverable. You know what I'm saying? It was broken forever. And I've always thought, like, Judas is an interesting character, really, because imagine being born, really, his whole kind of point for being here was ultimately to be the catalyst for redemption. Like, he was necessary. Like, him committing this great act of betrayal against Jesus was critical for the cross to happen. And the intimate nature of him kissing Jesus to identify him is, and it's gone down in history, is one of the most sort of dramatic representations. It's really like a living metaphor of how betrayal usually comes from those we're closest to, because they know us the best. And to really be betrayed, like in the fullest sense, somebody would have to really, know or be acquainted with sort of the deepest parts of you, right? To have the information to trap you or take you down in a striking way, a way that actually was effective, right? Like somebody could, a stranger can of course betray you, which, you know, in my robbery was the case, but in a way that'll always sort of be, it's painful and devastating, but it can never quite be as painful and devastating as something from your inner circle, from somebody who you trusted and believed had your best interest at heart, and the people that we believe we're safe with, that they love us the most, like we are the most meaningful person in their world, you know. And that's where the real price of betrayal is. That's where the real sort of gut-wrenching suffering comes from, is the not seeing it coming from those you trust with your deepest secrets and with your core of who you are, that you probably don't share with most people, right? It's a very usually select few people in our lifetime that we honestly are completely open with and give them, you know, sort of the inner workings of our heart. Usually people know us and they love us and we love them and we have relationships, but they probably don't know our deepest secrets, or the things that make us who we are, like the deepest part of our identity. And in the end, like, a human being, an individual, is known by their identity in the world, by the sort of the trademark of their individual personality, their particular charisma, the way they laugh or talk, or memories that you can have with them that are unique, that you couldn't have with any other individual because of their particular imprint on the world, right? It's like the world is full. It's, you know, that old saying, you can be in a crowded room and still be alone. It's like there's only like a tiny few people that we ever meet or associate with who don't make us feel like we're alone in a crowded room. Like we feel seen, heard, and I wouldn't say validated like in an external sense, but like from the inside out. Like we feel we feel happier in our own being or expressing ourselves. We feel more sort of, we're grateful for these very special people who know us from the inside out and cherish us, right? There's nothing greater on earth than genuine love and true caring about another person's, like you care about them having the best in life. You want to see them succeed and grow. And these are the natural feelings that a parent-child relationship should be based on. Intrinsically, a parent-child bond is probably the most intense relationship you will ever have in your lifetime, or maybe the bond you have with your children when you grow up and be an adult. You know, it's, you can have like romantic relationships, you can have deep fulfilling friendships, or, you know, sibling relationship, all these things, but there's something intrinsically different about a parent-child bond, simply because it's it's inherent that the parent wants what's best for their child to the detriment of themselves, to the point where they would sacrifice themselves and, give up their own, sometimes their lives, but their own comfort for this creature, that is, they want to see this, um, you know, creation that is a miracle, succeed and, be a legacy maker, right? So that is what, and like, even like our relationship with God is the Father, right? And, or if you believe in, other ways that, Mother Earth you call God, what's God to you, whatever gender or reality that is. But what I'm trying to say is that is a parental relationship at its essence, because a creator and his creation, that is a parental tie. So it even goes back into like sort of a representation of the ultimate commitment in life between God and his, creation. So in these ways, there's probably nobody who could affect us or cause us such great misery or great joy than a parent or child, truly. And this is why, many people who are deeply unhappy or live lives that are marked by trouble in sort of replaying that initial relationship, if it had gone horribly wrong, they'll replay it unconsciously with other people. That old saying, like, you marry your mother or father, like you end up finding somebody similar to, if you have a bad parent, usually you end up finding someone who has that same propensity, whatever their trouble was, alcoholic, or then you marry an alcoholic, whatever, somebody who was stern and disciplinarian and verbally cruel, you may be attracted to that type of person, though it's very unconscious. Like most people, and many people purposely choose to date the opposite kind of person, in reaction to that very fear, right? You know how they say, like, if I don't know why I keep using alcoholism, but if your parent was like an alcoholic, right, you'll probably either be following those same footsteps, or you're going to do the exact opposite and be a teetotaler. Is that how you say it? Whatever. People who don't drink at all. I don't remember what that's called. But, you'll abstain from it. You won't want to have anything to do with it. Rarely will you be kind of in the gray area if something really bad happened to you related to a parent and whatever their vice was, whether it was a mental illness, an addiction, a behavior. I mean, now there's a lot of data about narcissistic parents, which is like, I can barely read about it. It's so disturbing. But in my case, my biological mother was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia when she was 19 years old in White Plains, New York. And she had been at this sister school. It's like one of the sister schools. Like I went to one of the sister schools of the Northeast. Like I went to Sarah Lawrence. Okay, Bryn Mawr is part of this sister school system, and it just means it was predominantly a girls only school. Though the one I went to had become co-ed. The ratio was real off, but when my mom went to Bryn Mawr, it was all women, and my mom had gone there at 18-year-old to go off. Her parents were in the Midwest, and she basically had a catastrophic breakdown and just was, acting completely erratic, throwing her clothes suitcase out the window, talking to herself, throwing cans at people's heads. I mean, just completely batshit crazy. And so she was admitted to a mental hospital in like I said, in White Plains. And then when the diagnosis came, it was, my grandparents had to go there, and it was, probably the most upsetting, day of my grandmother's life, because it's the day that her other child, she had 3 children, her son had died in a electrical fire when he was in his 40s, in a New York City apartment, and he was like a very successful neurologist. So this was, she had thought her child was, who had overcome polio and had to walk on the polio kind of crutches the rest of his life. He got polio when he was 15 and lost, a lot of the use of his legs. So it was like for him to overcome that and then go to Duke Medical School and then end up being at Columbia and had this high position, and it was like a dream come true. It was like she had been taking care of him, of course, when he had the polio. My mom also got polio, and she had a shriveled arm. It was only about this high, and her other arm, of course, was normal because she got polio, and it was shriveled up, like there was actually atrophied. There was no muscle tone whatsoever. Like she could not, and it was her right hand. She couldn't even pick up a pencil or write with it at all, because she got polio when she was about 8 years old, when the polio epidemic hit their town in the Midwest, and she was bedridden for 2 years. But when she got out of that, it was like she had this deformed arm, and it basically stopped growing at the time of the injury. So she already had that going on, and so for her to get in this kind of well-known college, and finally she hated her hometown, hated her hometown, which ironically I live in hometown because I took on the family home. So it's very crazy family history, but she hated it here. And in fact, I found, like, this is so sad, but I found like a sign that my grandmother had made, and my mom had drawn on it and said, "Looking for friends." So sad, because she was bedridden, and I guess she tried to put it in the window or something. It's just like heartbreaking, So she had a terrible, terrible life in high school because she had to wear a back brace to prevent her back from being permanently crooked from the polio. So back then, the back brace was like a metal rod, went all the way up her back, and then it had like these metal compartments, almost looked like those sort of footrests on a wheelchair. They kind of looked like that, and it kind of clinked in here. So really, she looked kind of like a Frankenstein, because even if you could hide the brace itself with a dress or a coat, it's like there's nothing you could do to hide the metal pieces around her neck. So she was mercilessly bullied And also, when she was walking home once from high school, I guess there was some kind of local rapist, or I don't know what you want to call it, psycho, and he dragged her from the street into this wooded area that it's actually still here, like on the side of the road. It's this wooded area, and tried to rape her, but somebody saw it and they called the cops and she was saved. But she had like all her whole face and body was marked up by tree branches from him dragging her through the brush. So she had had quite a lot of horrible experiences in her early life, though my grandparents were wonderful to her. She was close with her two brothers, and there are a lot of good family experiences, but she was sort of plagued by these physical atrocities. And then the whole reason I'm talking about this is because with schizophrenia, sometimes it'll lie dormant in somebody. I've studied this to death. It can lie dormant there as a kind of recessive gene, and if something very traumatic happens to you, oftentimes it can sort of set off that, sort of wakes up that part of your biochemistry and ignites it. And like my grandmother just always had this idea that that's what had happened to my mom. She would always say, well, if she hadn't had polio, this wouldn't have happened. She would have been normal. But and the great tragedy in my family was my mom literally would not ever accept help or treatment, like, whatsoever, which is very common for schizophrenics, honestly. It's very, very, very common. But since my grandfather was a pathologist, and my mother's other brother was a pathologist, they owned a laboratory, and so they're doctors, Plus their other brother before he died was neurologist. These are all medical people. It was very hard for all of them to accept that though there is no cure for schizophrenia, like any kind of medication or psychological treatment or anything she could have, and they had the money to pay for all these treatments, and they ended up losing thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of dollars year after year after year, trying to fix her, save her, do something. And basically she spent most of her time in and out of incarceration. She was constantly being arrested. She constantly throwing huge physical tantrums and being extraordinarily violent and just screaming, kicking, punching. She was just a very, if you got her out of her element, which all she wanted to do was chain smoke and talk to voices. That was literally her life. That's all she wanted to do. She did not want to, if you were in the room with her or anybody, no matter who you were, she did not want to have a relationship with people. She didn't want to be part of the regular world. She wanted nothing to do with it. She was almost bizarrely content with her imaginary people and having those relationships, and that it even though it was obvious that she was plagued almost also by voices that were terrorizing her and making her mentally traumatized. You could tell that also was happening, especially with the nightmares and stuff. You could tell that simultaneously, it's like she had like sort of this good group of hallucinations where, you know, they were all just hunky-dory, and then she had these other sort of demonic, almost like she was possessed type voices coming at her that were horrific and causing her to act out at anybody in the vicinity, whoever you were, and attack others. So, and you know, the big mystery always was which one were you gonna get that day, or like who was she gonna be that day? Like nobody ever knew. Like it was just Russian roulette. You just didn't know which day or night, or there was never any instance where you were like, okay, I think I know who she's gonna be today, and it's like, no, you don't. Like you are going in there, you know, like a soldier, like going to war, you know, like something's gonna happen, but you don't really know what, you know. You may win, you may lose, but you're definitely going to battle, whatever the fuck you're doing. And sorry, there's like all these mosquitoes. It's annoying. So the thing about my family was they were obsessed with keeping this under wraps. Like, there were actually, it's horrible, but because of the genetics of schizophrenia, there was actually other family members in our line who had also this same illness, and you know, nobody wanted to talk about that either. Like, the whole family was like completely in line with, we don't talk about it, we just basically almost like we're her servants, we do whatever needs to be taken care of to clean up all her messes, and then we never talk about it again, or express any reaction. There were no like reactions in my whole family because I grew up with my grandparents, my maternal grandparents. Of course, my grandfather died when I was preteen, so it was really mostly my grandmother and my uncle, her brother. But like, my grandmother was really like my real mother, because she adopted me when I was 5 because my mom had assaulted me. She kidnapped me twice before the age of 5. Why? I don't know. Because she actually could not stand me. I mean, she could not stand me. She either put all her effort into completely ignoring me, and she would like ash her cigarette on me all the time when I was a kid, all the time, and just use me as like a living ashtray. Like, she did not, like I was not even like a piece of furniture, you know. Like, she just ignored me as a human being, absolutely. Or she, which a lot of times I was happy, not the ashing of the cigarettes, but I was happy about being ignored because I was terrified of her. And in fact, when my grandmother first adopted me, I would spend a lot of time crawling under tables, like if we were at a restaurant. Like, it was obvious I was used to hiding, you know, like I was used to trying to make myself small to get away and not be seen, you know, by you know who. And the first time, because my dad was taking care of me physically, he although he had my dad had bipolar 1, and he did have medication, and he did go to therapy, and he did seek treatment, and he was on lithium pretty much his whole life. But he was very good at caretaking me as a child and as a baby. He in fact delivered me my mom refused to go to an actual hospital because she was against the CIA and the Empress of China were going to be there and they were going to, I don't know, do something horrible to her. I mean, she just had all these psychotic revelations that were completely inane. And so she never let anybody know she was pregnant. So she lived in New York City, in Greenwich Village. Like my family in the Midwest did not know she was pregnant. And so she had no prenatal care. I ended up being born premature, between 4.5 pounds, almost to 5 pounds. I mean, it's not 5 pounds, more towards the 4.5. And so, she had no prenatal care, no post-birth care for me or her, and my father delivered me using a library book. He just read a library book about how to deliver a baby. He actually later on went to nursing school, and I don't know if that was like, feel like he was good at he's good at this, so he used to be a nurse. But he ended up becoming a nurse at Yale Hospital, moving back in with his father in Connecticut, and actually doing, it was probably the only period my father was able to sustain work because of his mental illness. And, but he delivered me. So anyway, so for my whole early childhood, we were in Florida, because my mom, they were living in Connecticut in a property that my paternal grandfather had let them live in. And while my dad was giving me a bath, my mom decided to set the whole place on fire. She set it on fire. So my dad was I think I was 3. My dad was using the bath water to help put out the fire, and they basically lost, almost everything in the fire. And so my maternal grandparents decided that they, obviously my paternal side is not crazy about keeping my mom with them, so they ended up going to Florida because my mom had this thing where she would, I don't know if it had to do with her mental illness or what, but she was obsessed with going for insane long walks, miles and miles and miles, to the point where you don't know if she's ever coming back. And my grandmother was always afraid of the winters in Connecticut and of her getting hypothermia or something. So, because nobody could ever control her or keep her. She's uncontrollable person. My father was not a dominant man. He was not a very machismo type of man. He was very much sort of a poet lover, music lover. I don't know. He was just very. He was a funny guy. He was, I wouldn't say passive, but he was not. He was more like a kid. He was great to play with when I was a kid because he really was a grown-up kid. And so, he definitely couldn't control her. So she just did whatever she wanted, And oftentimes, the times that we did go to the beach with her, with my grandmother, I just remember all these instances, especially when I was a teenager, where she would go way past any line or buoy or anything that you were supposed to, and she would always have to get rescued by the lifeguards because she was talking to herself and just not, you just literally could not ever, she was just not somebody, she was like a wild horse. You could never keep her down, ever. She was like a powerful force to be reckoned with, completely unmanageable. And she just ran everybody into the ground, really, because none of us could keep up with all the damage control we constantly had to do for her. So we would spend these family vacations, usually Christmas time, going down to Florida and spending weeks and weeks just cleaning up her everything she'd fucked up. You know, she had like gotten all these stray rabbits and cats and filled up the whole house with them, and they had, you know, shit all over the whole house, and the whole place was in disarray. And she set her stove on fire, and all the pots and pans were burned, and, you know, we would have to deal with that. I mean, it was just like, once we went there, and like the French windows she had, which were glass, were like shattered, and glass was everywhere. I mean, it was just like, you buy her stuff to keep her busy so she wouldn't damage things. Like, maybe she would just, you know, like, hopefully she'd be watching TV or something and be contained. But it's like, she would just go take, you know, the VCR you just bought her and go throw it in the garbage, you know, out back. I mean, she just literally uncontrollable. So the 2 times that she, you know, took off with me, again, I don't know why, because again, she didn't like me at all. When I was 4 to 5, is one time, the police in, let's see, we were in St. Petersburg, the police in Tampa, so somehow she drove to Tampa, found me and her early a.m. in the morning, both walking naked, holding hands, or side by side, I don't know, on the train tracks. And of course there was no identification on my mom because she was naked, and so it's not like now where there's, you know, a lot of analysis on cell phones and internet and all that. Like, nobody could really identify who she was. They're like, I really don't understand. At the end of, like, she had a record, so it's like, surely they could find out by her fingerprints something. But whatever happened, maybe they figured out who she was. But we got separated. Some social worker took me to like a orphanage-y type temporary residence, and I waited there until they eventually figured out who I was, and my father came and collected me. But the second time that she took me and I went missing, I don't know if we were at a hotel or motel or what, but she took some kind of blunt object and smashed me over the head with it, and I have a huge jagged scar on top of the crown of my head where she assaulted me. And then ended up in the hospital, and that's when my grandparents finally came and got me and adopted me officially. And on one hand, it was like the greatest day of my life because I finally could get away from her and not have to live with her anymore. But it was also traumatic because I lost my father, you know, and he ended up moving back in with his own parent because of his mental illness back east. So I lost, you know, the parent I enjoyed along with the parent that I was absolutely terrified of. And what does this have to do with family secrets and what families do to each other to keep up a certain... So this is the thing I can never understand about my grandmother. I can never understand if it was about image and how we looked. Like, she was just this gorgeous woman, and she was always well kept, and she always looked 20 years younger than she was, always. And she was extremely fit, physically fit, and swam all the time and did art. She was a painter, and she was just extremely good looking and well put together at all times. And I could never figure out if she, you know, because she was a doctor's wife, like, if it was like the image she wanted to portray of us being like not a family that had a deeply mentally ill, violent person within it, that she just lied to everybody and pretended like my mom didn't exist, or, you know, that she never would incorporate what went on in Florida with our lives, our daily lives. And so I was, mercilessly taught that should never speak of my mother, never talk about it to anybody, to friends. I never went to a therapist. Anytime I did talk about it openly with other family members, it would be categorically considered a betrayal of the highest kind, and that I was against not just her, but like our entire system, our family system, that like I was ungrateful and that I was, speaking the unspeakable. Like, it was not supposed to ever be spoken about. And it was just a weird time. It was like really a time like before the Oprah shows or Dr. Phil. Like, this was like in the 80s where people did not share a lot of, now people are constantly talking about their own diagnoses and everybody's very open about everything, honestly, to the point of ridiculousness. But back then it was very, or especially in the very conservative, smaller town city that we were living in a very, the middle of nowhere part of USA. But that was frowned upon and not encouraged for children to really express themselves in that way. And so that all went along, with how my grandmother wanted it to be, which is that it was a complete shutdown, complete denial. We pretended. She basically spent a lot of her time, which is sad now when I think about it. She spent so much of her life as a performance. It's sad to say, but she was extraordinarily performative. But she did lose her son in a fire, and then her only daughter had an incurable, severe mental illness that made her violent and not anything like the person she was. Like, the thing about my grandmother and my uncle and my grandfather, everybody besides me, is they all knew her as a human being she was before she was struck down with schizophrenia. They all knew the intelligent, funny, vivacious, even though she went, like I said, she went through a lot of horrible crap in childhood and high school. I found lots of pictures where she was laughing on family trips, and they were where she was happy, like she had good times, as a regular person. And most unfortunately for me, I literally never ever met or knew that person, except maybe the last 10 years of her life when she was in a nursing home and she fell down these stairs at a mental institute trying to escape, and she got, I don't know if it was a brain aneurysm or a stroke, something happened where she was put in a wheelchair and she couldn't function in the same violent type of way. She kind of lost whatever that was neurologically that made her. And I've also read and studied that schizophrenics, many times female ones, after they go through menopause, they lose such the severity of some of the disease. Like, it makes them less actively in their psychosis sometimes. And that kind of happened to her, where it's like she sort of regained her personality, plus the nursing home forced her to take medication for a mental illness that absolutely nobody ever in her life had gotten her to take. And she had, all her teeth had rotted out on her bottom row. They were all black. And she refused to go to the dentist for 40 plus years, So at the very end, it seemed like I did sort of get to know maybe who that person was deep inside, but it was brief visits, because I had a full-time job and I was raising my own 2 children. I was in actually a really toxic marriage, but whatever. And so it was more like we had I would take her for a walk on the nursing home grounds, and she would drink coffee or something and just talk. And of course, she was still smoking. And it was like she almost was like a regular person. But that was just glimpses, and she still had, she had neurological damage from the fall, so it wasn't like you could have like really get to know her, because she was not really there. But so the great betrayal for me with my family growing up is that, and I'm not saying this to garner attention or sympathy or anything like that, simply trying to like put it out there, because I know that mental illness in families there's a lot of people who have deep mental illnesses in their families where they do the same thing my family did, where they pretend it's almost like it's your fault for bringing it up, or it's your fault for like pointing out the problem, and I know that other people suffer like I suffered, where it's almost like you feel like you're crazy or guilty or shamed for making everybody unhappy by bringing it up, because it's like I was deeply unhappy not bringing it up and not having a voice and not getting to have a say in what happened with visitations with her. I had no rights or I had no control over my own physical life, because basically they needed me physically because I was stronger, younger than my grandmother and her sister. And my grandfather refused to go down and see my mom anymore because she had scratched his whole face up, and he just basically got out of it. It was like he got, like, I guess because he was a man, he just got the like, okay, so you don't have to ever go see her again, like you're free. But like for me, it was like, because I was so useful, because I could do so much labor and clean up and do all these things physically that they weren't, my grandmother would do a lot, but she couldn't do all the things I could do. So it's like they needed me to be, helping them do all these massive cleanup scenarios and, just all the shit that went on with her. So it was like I was, for all intents purposes, forced to be part of this, because I could have gone and been with other family members, and I had plenty of places I could have gone while they went and visited her, but they like insisted that I have this relationship with her that I did not want to. So the first betrayal of my life was when they adopted me, and I finally was free from my mom after the head injury, and I finally at 5 felt like I'm finally, I'm finally safe. I finally can have a life. I finally had the chance to maybe be happy. Not that I wasn't happy with my dad, but it was always overshadowed by my mom, and also my dad had a very hard time doing a lot of like regular tasks that mentally stable people are able to perform. He was, like I said, very childlike. It's like I finally had this second chance at life where I thought because at 5, I honestly, after that head injury incident, I felt like I always had that feeling ever since that age. Like I deeply remember having these feelings, and I even wrote in diaries about it, that especially when I was 8, I wrote a lot in diaries, that I felt like it was already too late for me. Like I always had that feeling. Like I was always just like, well, it's too late, like I'm not gonna ever be happy. Like I'm never gonna be a regular person. Like I'm never gonna be a healthy person. I'm never gonna be free to be who I could have been. I'm always going to be whatever was left after my mom, like I was like the leftovers, of after her and whatever happened, it was like I was the leftover parts of my identity. I was not who I once was, and I would never be that ever again. And so that was intrinsically damaged, and it was psychological, and it was permanent, and I didn't feel like I had the same shot at all the things like success or joy or whatever the good things in life. I just having good relationship. I just felt like it was just not in the cards for me. Like that ship had sailed. And that's a very sad thing for somebody under the age of 10 to feel, that it's already over. But that is how I felt. And then when I got adopted, I thought, oh, this is going to be it. I actually have a chance to regain myself and be somebody. And these are all real thoughts that I had as a kid. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, this is really the way I was thinking. And I remember it all very clearly. I was a very deep thinker from a very young age. And I was always deeply connected to having a sensitive soul. And I didn't have any siblings, so there was really no one else to compare notes with and talk to. So I always felt like I kind of had to bear witness. I had to bear witness to what really happened, because everybody else in my family was always covering it up or lying or just not. Truth was like not happening. Like they were as happy as I was with the truth and with getting to the bottom of things and sort of being like this little detective, sort of feeling everything out and learning people before I tried to trust again. Like as much as I was like that, they were the opposite. They were only happy when we were pretending and it was fake and it was all wrapped up in a pretty bow and nobody knew the truth, and it just made for fucked upness. And so when I found out that I was now going to have to keep seeing my mom, keep being her keeper, like that thing in the Bible. What is it, like Cain and Abel? Is it Cain who says it? Or is it Abel? Who says, am I my brother's keeper? When God asks, where's your brother? That's kind of how I was. Not that I'm like Cain, but I wouldn't want to be like Cain. He's like a murderer. The mark of Cain, so not good. But that's kind of exactly how I felt, like with my whole growing up and everything, it was just like, am I my mother's keeper? Is that what is going on? Like, is that what all I'm here for? Like, just to be, because it always came down to, if they had to choose between my mother's feelings, my mother safe, my mother having all the things that she needed done by other people because everybody had to run around and take care of her. She couldn't fend for herself whatsoever. She should have seriously been in a mental institution, but they deinstitutionalized all of the mental institutions, and we're too much in the 70s, and that's why most mentally ill people are either homeless or incarcerated, because they don't, except for a few state hospitals, most mentally ill people are either taken care of by their family members for life, or they're in and out of small institutions constantly, usually incarcerated and usually homeless. Like that's unless they have a family that's going to do everything my family did, because nobody's, people who are that deeply mentally ill cannot take care of themselves at all. Like, I don't know. It's weird. Like, sometimes they're functional. So my mom took the bus a lot because she lost her driver's license, and like somehow she managed to get on a bus and drive around. I don't know. It's like, how are you able to do this, but like you can't sweep up broken glass? Like, I'm not understanding. And it was always like that. It was always just like, I think that happens with mentally ill people and people who are highly addicted. It's like they bizarrely can do some things, but then they can't do others, and you're just kind of like, am I like missing something? Like, what the fuck is happening here? But where am I going with this video? The betrayal. So the difference between Judas and Peter is that, like I said, Judas was basically, it's crazy, but he was basically born to be the betrayer of Christ and to set in motion the entire divine story. Like, it's like it couldn't have happened the way it did without Judas betraying him. So it's like, in some ways, Judas had to exist. It's kind of weird. I mean, like, and then he killed himself, but it's like, imagine, like, and for 30 pieces of silver, like, that was nothing. That was like, I mean, not to say anything about, it wasn't even the price of like having somebody, a servant or a slave or somebody working for you. Like, that was more than 30 silver coins. You know what I'm saying? Like, the money was like, not like when Delilah betrayed Samson, she got a substantial sum of money to restart her life. I mean, it was substantial, but it was like, what you just got was nothing. It was like, it's almost like, I think he did it out of spite, or he did it because Jesus wouldn't do certain things that he wanted Jesus to do. He had like an agenda, and Jesus was uninterested in his agenda. Of course, he was interested in the way, the truth, the light. He had his mission, and Judas was supposed to be part of the 12 disciples and be part of that mission that he supposedly devoted himself to. But it's like, in the end, that wasn't what he was there for. He had ulterior motives. He had selfish, prideful ambitions that he wanted Jesus to fall into line with him, really. But Jesus refused. Not because he didn't, before he knew the betrayal would happen. Not that he didn't care for Judas. That was not what he was there on the planet to do. And like, he expressed that to Judas, and Judas knew that is against what Jesus stood for. That was not what he was about. It went against everything about him. And Jesus was not put on the planet to concern himself with worldly things, or to make, taxpayers or religious leaders, more popular, more rich, more whatever. He was there, for everybody who had been forgotten, for all the needy and the outsiders, for everybody nobody else wanted to deal with. Like, that's what he was there for. So I almost think, but with Peter, he told Peter, when the rooster cries 3 times, you're gonna betray me 3 times. Before the rooster crows, you're gonna deny me 3 times, which is what he did. And because people came up and said, oh, after Jesus was arrested, are you part of, the tribe of Jesus? And he denied him. Said, no, that's not me, 3 times. And eventually he repented, and after Jesus was risen, and he went on to do great things for, Christ's mission afterwards. And he was not like Judas. I mean, eventually he was captured by the religious elite and crucified himself, but he demanded to be hung upside down as sort of a punishment because he had betrayed Christ and he had never forgiven himself for it. And he thought it would be blasphemous for him to hang the same way that Jesus did because of what he did. So it's a wretched story. But the differences are that Peter, like the prodigal son, repented even though he didn't know if anything would come of it. He didn't do it to get anything out of it. He did it because he was truly broken inside from it. And he wished he hadn't done it. And he would do anything to go back in time and undo it, but he couldn't. Whereas Judas never had those feelings. I mean, he killed himself out of shame or feeling like a failure because of, he didn't get the worldly recognition or the reward that he thought he would get for betraying Christ. So it was more like he just felt rejected by the world, so that's why he took his life. He didn't take his life because he felt so guilty about what he did to Jesus. So this video is getting too long, so I'm not gonna keep going about this, but I'm gonna pick up some of this other stuff in a different video because I have a lot more to say. But the real betrayal after the point of my family, making me still have visitations with my mom and continue to have these horrible experiences with her, whereas like when I was 12, she like slapped my grandmother off this ladder. She was trying to paint my mom's house and then went after me like a complete possessed, crazy, violent person and like just dragged me out of this closet I was trying to hide in from her. I think I was 11, and just started kicking and beating the crap out of me. And my grandma was trying to call the police, and she was just calling me the scum of the earth. And she was like demonic. She was crazed. I thought she was going to kill me. And it was like, after that, like when we went back to the hotel away from my mom, it was like, my mom got arrested again. And I think put in a straitjacket or something, and taken to a mental hospital. I don't know. There was more than one incident where things like this happened. One time she got arrested by the police. Another time she got put in a straitjacket in front of me and taken off to be in restraints in a mental hospital. But the thing is, when we went back to the hotel afterwards, like, my grandmother would not speak of it. She would not ask me how I was, how I felt being talked to like that, or she wouldn't talk about her own disappointment that her daughter like slapped the shit out of her. I mean, it was like it never happened. It was just pretend. It was the whole thing like, let's just pretend it didn't happen. Let's, buy something, watch TV, just forget about it all. And the thing is, the next morning it was like time to go back and keep cleaning up Doris's house, keep doing what we always do, as if this hadn't occurred. And it was like, so the next betrayal I felt like was I had to figure out how to protect myself physically from my mother, because no one else was ever going to protect me. It was clearly obvious I was never going to be protected, because my grandmother had this crazy idea that because it was my biological mom, that my mom would one day see in me something that would wake her up out of her mental illness and suddenly be the person she once was, because of the love of mother to child, which she clearly did not have with me whatsoever in any way. But my grandmother, like, the greatest thing of her life was having children and being a mother. So like, she could not understand, she could not comprehend that like a mental illness would take that, which is because there was no information about mental illness, and if there was, my grandmother certainly wasn't reading it because she was pretending like it wasn't happening. But it's like, this was never ever going to happen, of course, clearly. Like, she was just going to try to kill me again. But I had to then decide, like at 14, like I remember at 14 or 13 or 14, I started to think, well, I'm going to have to come up with a way to get out of this. I'm going to have to come up with a way to protect myself. I'm going to have to come up with a way to get myself out of this mess. And then that is how people fuck up their lives exponentially, is when they're in a horrible family crisis that they fucking can't get out of, and they're being severely damaged by an addictive or mentally ill or a very selfish caretaker, and they realize no one's going to help me, and I have to figure out a plan to help myself, or I might not make it out of here. And so that is when people come up with the most harebrained, ridiculous, totally self-destructive, and ultimately disappointing ideas to save themselves, which is exactly what I did, because I had no adult skills. I didn't know anything about fucking anything, you know. Again, no cell phones, no internet, you know, 3 channels on the TV. Couldn't talk to anybody about anything that was going on, so I had no outside help. I think I told a couple family members, but they were unable to help me because, you know, my grandmother would, like, she ultimately had legal power over me, so it didn't matter if these other relatives were offering help. It was just not going to happen. So that's when I came up with this horrific plan to marry someone older and then get away from my mom legally, my grandparents, and start my new life free and clear. You know, that was my plan. And of course, that all horribly backfired. It's in some of my other videos, and turned into even greater abusive situation, that domestic violence, alcoholic haze of, you know, sexual abuse, you know, just a disaster, and the most epic. And I never did get away from my mom legally. I never got away from her at all. I never actually got married because I had all the laws wrong about, I didn't even understand everything about emancipating for your parents. Like, I just didn't know shit. Like, so what I'm trying to say is, like, this is the last thing I'm going to say in this video. It's like, when you're in these, like, no-win situations, like, absolutely zero hope of getting out, and you're a child or young adult, not yet 18, it's like you have no means of your own. You don't have, you know, that's, you know, not, I mean, you can get a job and stuff, but it's like you still have to live somewhere. I don't know, it's just like transportation. Like, you just are in this completely codependent relationship with these people who do not have your safety. And this is what I'm talking about the parental relationship, because I consider my grandmother my real mother, and I consider my biological mother, like, I don't know, my host mother or something. Like, she did not, besides giving birth to me, it's like I did not feel that we had anything. We had the opposite of a mother-daughter bond. We had, like, you know, prey, predator type relationship. So what I'm saying is, like, those are the times in life where people are trying to escape horrific situations. And it could be like, you know, a marriage with somebody who's deeply abusive, you know, it doesn't just, I'm not just talking about children. The only difference is when you're a child, you don't have the legal rights to get out of it. I mean, you know, of course, when you're married, then you're stuck in, like, sometimes financially or because of child custody or what. I mean, there's other reasons, even if you're an adult, where it's fucking impossible. But what I'm saying is, like, this is what causes, I think, the greatest trauma in life is sometimes not the original trauma, although that's pretty fucking bad. In my opinion, the worst things that happened to me in life were my reaction to the most traumatic things that were forced upon me. Because I always came up with these ways. There are a lot of addictive ways, a lot of poor choices, a lot of deeply misaligned, complete. It's like, you know, kind of like if you're watching a horror movie and you're like, oh, don't go in that room, don't pick up the phone, don't open that door. It was kind of like that. It was like, whatever I came up with, it was like the wrong idea. Like, it was like, my plans were the serial killers, and I was like the innocent, like, I don't know, person in the house, like, completely oblivious to, like, what's about to happen, you know. It's like, my plans came to, like, eat me alive, you know. It's like the opposite of what my plans were supposed to be about is what occurred. And in fact, it was worse than the original trauma. It's like, how is, like, escapism from the original things, like, worse than the original things? That is literally in the robbery. It was just like, everything, every time. I mean, I'm writing a book about it, and the shit, sometimes this shit's funny because it's also ironic. Sometimes I'm just like, wow, when you really put it down on paper, it's like, wow, this is really, like, this is like a great Lifetime movie, you know, on steroids. This is fucked up shit, you know? It's like, wow. It's like, can you make this situation worse? Well, it looks like you can. It's like amazing. Like, how did you top what was already happening to you? How is that possible? It's like, almost like you need an Oscar for this shit. It's so crazy. What the fuck? Okay, well, now I'm gonna end my video.